Chapter 5, Part 2 of Granny Heights Glasses. She made 2 more visits, though the way was over the toe of Peckerwood Mountain, briary and slippery and lumpy. She had Kyle help her fetch a lamp and 4 laying hens, and she showed Zelda Pulaski how to cook the food of the countryside. She taught her to make the bread of home-grated cornmeal, Johnny cake baked before the hearth on a greased board, bumper breakfasts of hominy grits with red gravy. Zelda, in turn, had tricks of her own. Cakes made in oil with chopped onions rolled in, yellow cookies that were stars with 6 points, and dry as chaff Unritz pats called matzoff. She outraged Granny by baking 1 loaf of good cornmeal with rye flour mixed into it, a rock-like loaf which only went down because it was smeared with a chunk of honey an inch deep. Steve Pulaski, in the wonderful woods nearby, had come upon a bee gum, and the Pulatskis just about rolled in honey. The children were learning to play. They rode sticks, they shoved and squabbled some. They had poppets, little dolls made of shucks and cobs. Granny rejoiced to see it. But Granny's troublesome leg veins and a dropping in for a long visit by Poppy McLeese and all her young ones shut down on more tromps to the Peeler place for a time. As soon as Poppy patched up her quarrel with her husband and took her brood home, Granny hobbled to Toller store. She wanted to finish paying for her specs. Approaching the store porch, she noticed the usual gossips and resters, but there were several more than the bench would hold. The talk wasn't noisy and thigh-slapping, it was low. When Granny climbed the steps, it stopped wholly. "Land of Pisgah, who's dead?" inquired Granny. Nobody spoke. "What's nipped your tongues?" she asked it sharply. Jim Hardy spat. Bide Beckett cut a whittling smack in half, and there went the tail of his applewood squirrel. Old Grandsir Beckett, his chin a-quiver, put his hand on his whiskered face and stared off toward the top of a dead pine on Peckerwood Mountain. Godlove Cornet put away his knife and got up abruptly. Tuckaleech Annabel, who had been making some kind of speech, puffed out his cheeks and rolled his back around a porch post. Granny peered searchingly through her new specs. "You boys are up to something. It ain't politics or you'd be shouting. It ain't filth or you'd be laughing. It ain't girls or you'd be fighting. Tuckaleech Annabel, why ain't you home tanning skins? Or you, Bide Beckett, at Forge and Bellers?" "It's them furriners at the Peeler place," said Tuckaleech, who was fat enough to be good-natured, but wasn't. "They been grabbing water crease from my creek branch." "Shame on you, Tuck Annabel. Were you going to use that crease?" "They robbed a bee tree that I've been on the hunt for," grumped Tuckaleech. "Was it your tree? When did you ever run a line of fence?" Exclaimed Bide Beckett, good blacksmith and solid earnest man. "Grandsir here gave up a day's terrapin grabbing to go over and extend the hand of fellowship like you told him to. That there old one sat glummin' before the fire. 'Bet you a can of snuff I can take you in horseshoes,' calls Grandsir in the door. 'Spot you 9. No answer but moany noises. 12. The old gent doesn't speak. 15, you old wool-rocked old coot, yells Grandsir, or are you holding out for the whole 21? And goes in and clomps his shoulder. Up leaps the old curly beard with a screech and winds 10 fingers into Grandsir's whiskers. He won't let go, and they wrestle and go to the floor, and Grandsir, he don't get loose until he gives up a fistful of cheek fur. What kind of manners was that?" Grandsir Beckett brought his hurt glare down from the mountain and turned it on Granny Height. "And that ain't half," said Godlove Cornet. "That Steve Pulaski goes over to Marienborough this week and lugs back some kin. They ain't new lights, or rollers even. Never showed up for camp meeting. The names they have for their young ones, Estrich, Serafel, Mitzpah, Yoshki. Won't eat fatback, call it swine meat. Hold their Sabbath on a Saturday. The oldest boy is already chunking glances at my young Silver Moon. They ain't us. They got no right," summed up Tuckaleech Annabel. "Setting up here for keeps and sending for kin." Something disturbing again stirred in Granny, as it had the first time she beheld the Pulatskis. She put it down, suppressed it, but she knew what it was. Tuck and Bide and Godlove had a pint. The 4 parents of Granny Height and one of her long-time neighbors had come here when the nation was young, banding together to drive the forest back. They'd raised each other's houses. felled the trees, cross-sawed them, rolled the logs, and heisted them, every pair of hands pulling on block and tickle. Settled each other's fresh adze floors with reel and jig, to whoop of mountain fiddle as the workaday ended. And a valley of one blood and mind down the generations, this cup in the gray-green hills had stayed. Alarm for the ancient oneness of Cat Track Hollow deepened inside Granny. It was like the tolling of a big bell. Her 5 times great Aunt Lucy height had waked in the night with such a feeling, too powerful to be thrown off. She'd riz and dashed out with a fire in a pan and lit the signal brush heap and hauled hard on the meeting house bell rope, yanked it till she jangled every man jack into his boots, and in the nick of time, in half an hour the Cherokees were on them. Just the same, Granny Height heard herself say to the fretful men on the mountain store porch. These Pilatskys are hard working. It takes get up to swing a pick in Coal Mountain and spunk to push a wheelbarrow to Marionborough and back. Granny began to warm up to the subject. You, Nathan Beckett, before you planked your hand on the old one's shoulder, could you have made sure he heard you? When he's singing, he's like deef. She went into the store and paid the last eggs owing on her specs. It was good to be shut of a debt. She had a chance to use her new glasses that very night. Waking from a sound sleep, she became aware of a flicker on the path outside. Somebody was going by with a lantern. She reached for her glasses. That was Tuckaleech Annabelle, headed for Toller's store at this hour. She got straight up and went to her open door. Here and there were other winking lights. The night was soft with perfume of cloverfield and warm sweet orchard. But something damp and chill blew through the house. Not in 40 years had the men of Cat Track Hollow gathered in the secrecy of night. Not since Trevitz warred with Hardys and Cornets with Peelers, and blood was on the moon. Such tiptoeing now meant mischief. Toward the Pilatskys. Granny pulled her gown on, her shoes. Her thoughts churned. Great Aunt Lucy must have felt this way the night she woke and smelled Cherokee. Lucy had rushed forth and yanked a bell rope. Granny paused long enough to snatch up 6 cherry pies she had baked for a church supper. She put them in a basket and set off, her mind a race. She didn't know what she wanted the pies to accomplish, but common sense told her that no work of Satan was ever made worse by all parties to the ruckus having a snack beforehand. It was a good 2 miles around the toe of Peckerwood to the old Peeler place. Stars went hidden as she plunged into the thickety dips and climbed tangly rises. The woods gave off 1,000 crackles and smells of prowly creatures and breathing plants. She found the Pilatsky door shut tight against the night air. That was another of the queer ways the Outlanders had brought with them from Grosjack. She beat on the weathered door boards. Someone could be heard getting up and fumbling around inside. It was Zelda who drew the door open. I want you to dress right away. Get everybody up, directed Granny. Zelda looked puzzled. Hurry, ordered Granny. But it is night. Zelda, some folks are coming. I've brought you a bite to eat in case you don't have time. Her throat tightened. She wanted to say, in case they send you off before you can pack, but she couldn't say it. Because of the quick, bright joy in Zelda's eyes. They come tonight? Now? To my house? It is a party? Zelda gleefully clapped her hands. Up, Auntie, and little ones and older ones. Push back the bed straw from the floor. Yoshka, Mordecai, build up the fire. She lit the lamp, her cheeks shone, her eyes danced. The neighbors come to see us, not as in the old country with whips and soldiers, but with kindness, always kindness. See the basket of pies Mrs. Height brings? It is the great America I tell you of. Some day we repay. Tonight we shall set out what we have. The cabbage borscht, the noodle pudding, the Sabbath loaf. These pies, we shall make them hot. Our neighbors, they will understand it's all we have tonight, yes? But we shall have fun. We shall have games. Her eyes clouded. My Stephen is not here. He will miss this party. He takes the old one to town to see a doctor. Not until tomorrow does he return. If you're alone, you're alone, snapped Granny. She was stumped by Zelda's mistaken notion. She trusts us, perceived Granny. She thinks we're grand, and we're not one bit grand. Maybe in the rest of America folks are as she thinks. But here we're the owners of bee gums and fishing holes, and we keep what we have. Granny was perplexed about her own position in the matter, too. What was she doing here? It was as if Aunt Lucy had found herself on the side of the Cherokees. It was all a mix-up, and Granny was upset and angry with herself for being such a poke-nose. She only knew that she'd come here to warn Zelda, so the Pulatskys could be in their clothes and on their way without pitch and feathers and a rail or any such deviltry. Instead, Zelda was delighted. Granny, sorely provoked, wondered how she was to tell Zelda that this oncoming thing wasn't a lark. It was dark and ugly. But while she sought words for the telling, Granny suddenly saw that Zelda's ignorance was in fact her strength. Through it, she'd make the marching men welcome. It was her shield sent by the Lord. That was it. The Lord was on Zelda's side, she being the weaker, and so it was a good enough side for Granny. She'd strap Zelda's shield on. Now remember, Zelda, you're not one smidge afraid. Afraid? Just act happy. But I am happy. That's fine. The Lord had her in his care. He'd keep up her faith in the Holler's goodwill as long as possible, and the men, being hungry from their march around the mountain, would eat and be grateful and maybe find softer words for telling her to leave. They even might give her a few days' grace to go in the best of health, as Zelda would put it. That's what I ask and pray for, thought Granny. A chance for her to go in peace and nobody hurt in body and not too much in feelings. Nothing lost by the Pulaski stop and cat track but a little wild honey and watercress and some cheek fur from Grandsir Beckett. Everybody in the shanty was astir now. Time was short. The children, sensing excitement, pillow fought and Indian whooped and war danced. Oh, Tuckalich, Bide, and Link, prayed Granny, let them stay noisy. Borscht bubbled. The table was dragged forth. The bed straw kicked aside. Through the room stabbed the tang of pies retoasting. Night was still on the mountain when the hideous whoop-de-doo broke from the woods. Kettles banged, saws rasped, there were howls and some shots. Granny slipped into the lean-to. It's best to let Zelda be, she told herself. It's best to leave this to Zelda, and may the men be fair. Peeking, she watched Zelda Pulaski step to her open doorway, holding up the lamp. The hullabaloo doubled. There were cat calls. Welcome to my house! Come in! Come in! Zelda stood there, the lamplight glinting on her comb, on her coiled hair and round white arm. Little dangles flashed gaily at her ears. She peered toward the figures in the shadow. Her delight was honest. At this warm bidding, this cordial greeting, the hubbub lost some of its tuck. It trailed off uncertainly. With eagerness she beckoned. But step in, my friends! Efforts were made to get the ruckus going again, but after some shots and shouts it petered out. She stood smiling hopefully with the door thrown wide. Silence followed in the black woods. It was broken by whispers. A spokesman was pushed forward. Bide Beckett, the anvil-solid man, stopped at the edge of the lamp glow. Ma'am? You did not come in. Is it because my Stepan is away? He will be sorry to miss you, but I am so proud that you visit. Mitzpah, lift the borscht, child. Sarafeld, the noodle pudding. Esker, cut the loaf. Yoshki, move the last of the straw. Enter now, my friends. Next time there shall be more, much more. But what there is here is yours. How do you say it? Draw up and reach. Flummoxed, Bide stood in his tracks. Drumming folks out, riding them on rails perhaps, is no small chore in the face of a ringing bid to a meal, cried Zelda, alarmed for the first time. What you see on my table is not enough. It is too Polish? But where are your noses? Sarafel, Mitzpah, the pies, the hot cherry pies. The girls lifted and bore the pies from the hearth oven and placed them on the table. Sarafel poised and drove knife. Juice spurted. Savor leaped. Relishing goblets rolled from under the crisp brown crust. Thought Granny, peeking through the lean-to door crack. I'm glad the Lord directed me to make kivered pies. Kivers keep the zang and smack in for the knife poke. The Lord knew Bide Beckett when she rolled that crust. Now watch him crump. Bide's warlike intentions, already weakened by Zelda's cheerful greeting, by her gay lack of daunt, indeed caved in. Sheepishly he turned and called, Come here, you fellers, and help me in this. Maybe we made a mistake. I don't aim to eat it all alone. One by one they shambled from the forest, spoke their howdy to Zelda, and sidled in. At least 20 men and big boys made the core of the band. There were small fry, giggly girls, and lankish women too. Bide counted his comrades. Tuckalich Annabel, where are you? I ain't a giving in. You're a bunch of softies, Tuck's yell came from the trees. Come on, Tuck, you're always hungry. She set up a right pert feed. I don't hold with furriners. Then chew grass, Bide pushed in with the rest. Granny found herself good and angry with that Tuck-a-leech. She wanted to cry, you Tuck Annabelle, where are your manners? She didn't, though. This was Zelda Pulaski's party. Zelda and the auntie and the youngsters were doing fine. They bustled, serving helpings to everybody. The shanty was chock full and elbow tight. Zelda's tongue clattered. Her earrings twinkled. Pleasure rosied her face, and the cheeks of her guests grew stuffed. They're not sure, but maybe they like her, suddenly decided Granny with a thrill. Now for sure there won't be any pitch and feathers party. They'll hitch up their own wagons tomorrow, might be, and take the Pulaskis out from the holler comfortable and friendly. Praise God, Zelda has changed their minds for them just by being herself. Zelda exclaimed, everything is so wonderful in America. This so funny concert, it was jolly. This is a surprise party, yes? Ma'am, it sure is. Plainly Bide hadn't got over his own surprise at finding himself inside the building with pudding and pie in his hands. He owed her some explanation. You see, ma'am, we didn't come here exactly to... Jerusha! What's that? Fire! Yelled Jim Hardy.